The ballroom of the Omni William Penn glowed under chandeliers when a board member's hand tipped his wine. Cabernet splashed across Silas Bradbury's sleeve and onto a woman's lilac dress. He did not move. Harlow Sterling crossed the floor in 3 quick steps and spoke loud enough for 2 tables to hear. Service entrance is around the back. We invited binders to deliver, not to mingle. The lobby doors opened. An assistant called across the marble. "Mr. Bradbury, sir, the binder is asking when he may leave." Harrison Sterling stopped walking. His face went white. He mouthed the name once. "Bradbury. If you're new to this channel, and you love stories where a single name unravels everything, take a moment to like and subscribe. We post a new one every week." 12 hours before the wine fell, the morning came slow over Butler Street. Silas Bradbury opened the side door of his bindery at 6. Lawrenceville was still dark blue at that hour, the streetlights orange. His neighbor's cat curled on the stoop next door. The shop had belonged to his uncle Conrad, who died the same year Silas closed his other life. Conrad had left him the building and the tools, and a letter that said only, "Don't be a stranger to the work." Silas had not been. By 7, Hazel sat at the small side table with a bowl of oatmeal and a paperback open on her knee. She read aloud to herself in a quiet voice, the way she always did, as if the words behaved better when spoken. It was fall break at Arsenal Elementary, and she had asked to come to the shop instead of staying with Mrs. Devlin next door. Silas was stitching the spine of the last of 12 commemorative volumes. He used a curved needle, drawing the linen thread through the gatherings with steady tension. Hazel watched. "Why don't you use a straight one?" she asked. "Straight needle catches the wrong fiber. The curve keeps the tension even across the signature." Hazel wrote that down in her field notebook. She kept one. She had seen her father keep one for years, though she had never opened his. The phone on the bench rang at 9:10. The Sterling event coordinator confirmed delivery before 5 and asked if Silas could stay on standby until 7, in case any of the bindings needed last-minute repair. "That's fine," Silas said. He had taken the order 3 months earlier through Sarah Ing, an archivist at the Carnegie Library who had used his shop for the Frick collection. The coordinator had referenced Bradbury Bindery and not connected the name to anything else. Why would she? The invoice on his bench read Sterling Industries, 25th Anniversary Commemorative Volumes. The purchase order beneath it had been countersigned in a clean hand at the top. H. Sterling, CEO. Silas set his hand flat on the bench beside it for a long moment. Hazel looked up from her book. "Daddy okay?" "Just thinking." She watched him a second longer, then went back to her page. Mrs. Devlin had an eye appointment that afternoon and could not take Hazel for the evening. Silas had no other options. He would not leave her alone for 6 hours. So she came. They drove the old Honda across the 16th Street Bridge in light traffic. Hazel counted barges on the Allegheny. Silas drove without music, both hands high on the wheel. He did not speak the whole way downtown. The Omni William Penn loading dock sat at the back of the building on William Penn Place. A staff lead in a black vest checked Silas's clipboard and waved him to the service elevator. Margaret Halloran stood at the vendor checkpoint just inside the kitchen corridor, gray hair pinned back, a small sterling pin on her lapel that looked older than the company itself. She glanced at his name on the manifest. Her pen paused. "You're the binder." "I am." She marked the line. Her face did not change. She smiled at Hazel and said there was hot cocoa in the staff lounge, and would she like to come along? Hazel said, "Please." Margaret took her hand and led her down the corridor, glancing back once at Silas before they turned the corner. Silas pushed the cart of books through the swing doors toward the main hall. String music came faint from the ballroom ahead. On the top volume, embossed in gold leaf, the words Sterling Industries, 25 years of precision. He read them once and then started walking. The delivery was clean. The receiving desk signed for the books at 12 minutes to 5. The lead coordinator thanked Silas and asked him to wait near the display board until 7, in case anything needed adjustment. The display board was a long white wall on the south side of the ballroom, 12 framed panels documenting 25 years of Sterling Industries. Each panel held an enlarged technical schematic with a small placard beside it, naming the year and the product. Silas stood with his hands behind his back and his eyes on panel 3. It was a micro-bearing housing schematic. The signature in the lower right was so small that no one had bothered to crop it out, or perhaps no one had noticed it at all. The initials read S.B. and the date read November 3rd, 2012. The schematic on panel 3 was the deprecated draft. He had revised it 2 years later with a tightened tolerance at the lower right radius. The displayed version had loose tolerance. Any micro-bearing engineer who saw it photographed would think Sterling's manufacturing was sloppy. A young woman in a black PR vest came to stand beside him, holding a clipboard and a tablet. She was muttering to herself about press photography scheduled for the morning. Silas did not turn his head. He spoke quietly. The angle on panel 3 is from a deprecated draft. The tolerance at the lower right radius reads loose. If a competitor's engineer sees that photo tomorrow, they'll think your manufacturing spec is soft. You may want to swap the panel for the next revision before the press shoot. She looked at him. I'm sorry, who are you? Dabina. How do you? It's just an observation. She thanked him quickly and walked off in the direction of the production manager. Silas remained where he was. Across the ballroom, Reagan Cox stood near the open bar with 2 clients, telling a story loud enough to carry. He turned too sharply with the glass in his hand. The Cabernet went up in an arc and came down on Silas's sleeve, and a few drops carried farther, across the lilac silk of the woman beside him. Diane Mortensen, art collector, donor to the symphony. She inhaled sharply and stepped back. Harlow Sterling was 3 tables away. She saw the spill and the people around it in a single sweep. She read the room the way she had been taught to read it. Reagan was a board member. Diane was a major giver. The man with the wet sleeve was a vendor. She crossed the floor in 3 steps. Service entrance is around the back. We invited binders to deliver, not to mingle. Silas did not lift his head. Apologies, ma'am. I'll wait outside. He picked up his cart and walked through the swing doors toward the kitchen corridor. He did not look back. The lobby doors opened behind him. Harrison Sterling came in late, his overcoat on his arm. The assistant at the door saw him and said, "Low and routine, Mr. Bradbury, sir. The binder is asking when he may leave." Harrison stopped where he was. "Bradbury?" "Yes, sir." "Silas Bradbury, from a shop in Lawrenceville." Harrison lowered himself into the upholstered chair in the lobby. He put his hand on his knee to steady it. Margaret was already at his elbow. "Margaret." "Yes, it's him." "Yes." He closed his eyes. "Does he know I'm here?" "No. But she just sent him to the service entrance." Harrison opened his eyes and looked toward the swing doors, but the doors had already closed. Silas was allowed to leave at 10 minutes to 7. He collected Hazel from the staff lounge. She was halfway through her paperback and a second cup of cocoa. Margaret walked them to the service exit, touched Silas's forearm once on the way out, and gave Hazel an apple wrapped in a napkin. "For the drive," Margaret said. Hazel said thank you and meant it. They drove home through downtown, then over the bridge, then up Butler. Hazel fell asleep against the door before they crossed the river. Silas glanced at her at every red light. At the corner of Penn and 46th, he watched her face in the dim glow of the dashboard for longer than the light gave him. At home, he carried her inside and put her in her bed and pulled the quilt up. He went back down to the kitchen and put a kettle on the stove and then walked into the workshop. He opened the lowest drawer of the bench. Inside was a wooden box that had faded from oak to gray. He did not open the box. He set his hand on the lid for a second and then put it on the top shelf, above the drafting books. The kettle whistled. He did not pour the water. Across town, in a private second-floor room at the Omni William Penn, Harrison Sterling sat with a glass of water and asked Margaret one question. "How long has he been in Pittsburgh?" "The whole time, Harrison. He never left." "You stopped looking." He nodded slowly. He called his daughter. He asked her to come to the house in Sewickley before she went home. Harlow drove out at 9. The drive took 30 minutes in light rain. She did not ask why on the phone. She had heard a quality in her father's voice she had not heard in 4 years, since the week of her mother's funeral. In the study, with the lamp on and the curtains closed, Harrison did not offer her a drink. He gestured to the chair across from him. "You spoke to a man tonight whose name was Bradbury. Tell me what you said," she told him. She did not soften it. She framed it as crowd management. A board member had spilled wine. She had redirected attention. Harrison nodded once when she finished, but it was not approval. "His name is Silas Bradbury. Before this company was Sterling Industries, It was his. The silence in the room lasted 10 seconds. What do you mean, his? I bought it from him 9 years ago for $1 and a foundation. I owe him things I never repaid. And tomorrow, I would like you to come with me to his shop. Why now? Because I should have gone 9 years ago. She left the study at 10. Margaret had already gone home, but on the entry console, under a small dish for keys, there was a sticky note in Margaret's hand. It listed an address on Butler Street, and one line beneath it, he closes at 6. Go before. Harlow stood in the entryway with the note in her hand for a long time before she put on her coat. In a high apartment on the south side, Colin Whitaker stood at his window with a glass of bourbon he did not drink. His phone buzzed twice. Reagan Cox, twice. He read the messages and did not answer them. He set the glass on the sill and watched the river move under the bridge lights. At the bindery on Butler Street, the phone on the bench rang. No number showed. Silas did not pick up. After 4 rings, voicemail caught the call. The voice on the recording was older than he remembered. Silas, it's Harrison. I'm coming tomorrow. I'm sorry it took this long. A pause. Then the line cut. Silas stood in the dark workshop without moving. The next morning came overcast with a thin rain. Silas opened the shop at 9. Hazel had eaten breakfast at home. Mrs. Devlin had walked over at 1:15 and taken her back across the street to spend the morning baking. Harrison Sterling arrived at 10. He came alone. There was no driver, no assistant. His coat was wet across the shoulders. He stood outside the glass door for a long moment before he raised his hand to knock. Silas opened the door. The 2 men did not shake hands. The silence between them lasted 8 seconds. May I come in? Harrison said. Silas opened the door wider. Harrison stepped inside and looked around. The press, the standing trimmer, the shelves of book cloth and goatskin in coiled rolls, a small framed photograph above the bench showed a younger man and a woman in a park. Your uncle's place. He left it to me. I didn't know he passed. You weren't expected to. Silas put a kettle on the hot plate in the back corner. Neither of them spoke while the water heated. He brought 2 cups to the bench. Harrison sat on the wooden chair. Silas leaned against the bench across from him. I haven't read a foundation report in 4 years, Harrison said. After the stroke and Eleanor's funeral, I stopped reading anything the board sent. I signed what they put in front of me. I didn't know the royalty had been cut. Margaret put the disbursement records on my desk last night after the gala. Has it really been cut? 4 years. Silas set the cup down. Slowly, he did not raise his voice. That's $2 million in research funding lost. Maybe more. I'll make it right. I came to tell you that to your face, not through a lawyer. You can't make it right alone, Harrison. The board cut it. The board has to restore it, and someone has to answer for why. I know who. The shop door opened. The bell above it gave its small flat ring. Harlow stood in the doorway. The note was in her coat pocket. She had not announced herself to her father, and her father had not told her he was coming this morning. She had simply driven to the address Margaret had given her. She saw the 2 men at the bench. She did not move from the doorway. She heard the end of the sentence Silas had just spoken. She came in. She hung her coat on the hook by the door. She sat on the 3rd chair at the corner of the bench. Silas pushed the 3rd cup of tea toward her without a word. She looked at her father. Why didn't you tell me everything last night? Because Silas should be in the room when I do. Harrison spoke for 8 minutes. He spoke without dramatics. Silas had founded Bradbury Precision 16 years ago with 1 patent and had 3 by 12 years ago. Those 3 patents had become the foundation for Sterling's precision product line since the acquisition. The agreement had carried a perpetual royalty of 1.5% of gross revenue flowing into the Lenora Bradbury Foundation, which funded ALS research at UPMC and Pitt. The royalty had been cut 4 years ago. Harlow listened without interrupting. She did not look at Silas while her father spoke. She looked at her hands. When Harrison stopped, she finally looked up. Why didn't you fight? Silas turned his cup a quarter in his hands. I sold it because I had a 4-month-old daughter and a wife in the ground. I didn't have a fight in me. The terms were fair. I trusted your father. Trust isn't a thing you fight for. You either have it, or you wasted it. She nodded. She stood. She walked to the door. She stopped. I need to see the original agreement. The real one. Margaret has a copy. So does the escrow firm. Callaway, Reese, and Voss. Ask them. They've been waiting. Harrison stood. He looked at Silas across the bench. Will you come when she's ready? I'll come for the foundation, not for the chair. By 11, Harlow was at her desk on the 38th floor of Sterling Tower. She called David Park, the general counsel, and asked for three things: the complete asset purchase agreement from the acquisition year with every schedule, every amendment to the license agreement from any year afterward, the annual royalty distributions to the Lenora Bradbury Foundation from acquisition to present. Park called back at 20 to 12. The original agreement had been archived to off-site cold storage 4 years earlier, and retrieval required approval from the chief operating officer. The amendment file held only one version, dated 4 years ago. There was no original on file. The royalty distributions ran clean, and even until the fall of that year. From October forward, the line item read 0. Harlow sat at her desk and did not move for 2 minutes. Then she dialed Margaret. Where is the original? In my personal safe, and in escrow at Callaway, Reese and Voss since the day Silas signed. Your father co-signed the escrow himself. Mr. Whitaker does not know it exists. I want to see it. Today, 6 o'clock. B2, I'll meet you. Harlow ended the call. She stood at the window and looked down at the Monongahela. There was a knock at her open door. Colin Whitaker stepped in without waiting. David tells me you're pulling the BP archive. May I ask why? She turned. She kept her face flat, routine. Pre-audit before quarter close. If you need help interpreting old documents, my team can assist. I'll let you know. He stood there for 2 seconds too long, then nodded and left. He walked directly to his own office. He closed his door. He called the senior archive manager who reported to him. Anything left in the BP box, pull it. Move it to my office tonight. There was a long pause on the line. Sir, that box has been empty since 4 years ago. Per your last instruction. Colin did not speak. He hung up. He sat at his desk with his hands flat on the wood. He realized, in the order people realize these things, that he had been so thorough in his erasure that he had left himself nothing to retreat to if a copy surfaced elsewhere. At 6 on the dot, Harlow stepped out of the freight elevator on level B2 and walked down the corridor of the records archive. The fluorescent tubes hummed. The air smelled of paper and dry concrete. Margaret was waiting at the long metal table at the end of the corridor. In front of her was a dark green binder, edges worn, the kind people carried for years. The handwritten label on the front read Bradbury Acquisition, Originals, H.S. and M.H. only. She opened it. She turned to the first page, the Asset Purchase Agreement. To the third page, the Royalty Schedule. To the fifth page, it was a handwritten letter on a sheet of unlined cream paper, 1 paragraph. The handwriting was Silas's. The date was the day of signing. Harrison. Keep the company strong. Keep the foundation funded. That is all I ask. I won't be a name on the door, but the door was once mine. Try to remember that on the days the work feels small, S.B. Harlow read it once. She set her hand flat on the table beside the binder. She did not cry. She breathed slowly, in and out, twice. Margaret watched her and said nothing. Margaret turned the page. There were the amendments. The version signed 4 years ago. Signed Colin Whitaker. No countersignature. The language had been changed in 2 places. Perpetual royalty had become royalty subject to annual board review. The annual disbursement clause had a new sentence appended granting the chief operating officer authority to redirect distributions to a strategic reserve fund pending board ratification. Harlow read the changes. He cut it under cover of a structural amendment that was never properly signed. There is more. Margaret turned to the next tab. She had been waiting for this part. She had assembled it over 4 years in a separate file in her safe. 2/3 of what was cut from the foundation, she said, did not reduce the company's expense line. It was moved into a strategic reserve fund that Mr. Whitaker holds sole signature authority over. From that fund, he has paid out $1.3 million in consulting fees to 2 firms registered in Delaware. The firms have no employees on record. No invoices for documented services. The wires were authorized by him alone. Harlow read the disbursement schedule. She read the wire confirmations. She read the certificates of formation for the 2 Delaware entities. He stole from a foundation that funds ALS research. He stole from a foundation named after a woman who died of it. Your father's sister Beatrice died of it 18 years ago. Your father agreed to those terms at the acquisition because he knew exactly what those royalties were for. Mr. Whitaker has been in this company long enough to know that too. Harlow lowered herself to the floor and sat with her back against a shelf. She did not cry. One slow tear, no more. She was not crying for Silas. She was not crying for her father. She was thinking of the 4 years she had signed quarterly reports without ever asking why a small line item labeled BP royalty allocation had disappeared. Margaret did not comfort her. She closed the binder and held it out. Do what is right, not what is tidy. Your father trusted you with this company. Silas trusted your father with this company. The chain does not break with you. Harlow stood. She brushed her skirt smooth. She took the binder. She called David Park from the corridor. He came to B2 within 15 minutes. He sat at the long metal table and read for 25 minutes in silence. When he closed the binder, he set both hands on it and looked up. This is criminal. This is not a board matter alone. This is a referral to the United States Attorney for the Western District of Pennsylvania. My recommendation is we secure these documents tonight and convene the board at 8 in the morning. Con bene it. Will Mr. Bradbury attend? He'll ask him. She called her father from the parking garage. He answered on the second ring. He agreed to be there. He said it would be the first time he had set foot in the building in 4 years. She drove home through downtown. She took the long way. She crossed the Liberty Bridge and went north on Butler. She slowed at the bindery. The lights were still on. She pulled to the opposite curb and shut off the engine. Silas was wiping the bench down with a cotton rag. Hazel was asleep on the small daybed near the window, with a quilt over her shoulders. Silas worked without hurry, the way a man works who has done the same motion 1,000 times. Harlow watched for 5 minutes. She did not get out of the car. She did not text. She put the car in drive and pulled away. At 8 in the morning, the emergency board convened on the 40th floor. Harlow at the head of the table, David Park to her right, 5 directors around the long oval, Colin Whitaker at the far end, and, against his expectation, Harrison Sterling in a chair against the back wall, in a gray blazer, saying nothing as he came in. Harlow did not open. She let Park speak. He spoke dryly, in clauses. He described the discovery of the unilateral amendment to the perpetual royalty clause 4 years earlier. He described the diversion of 67% of the cut funds into the Strategic Reserve Fund. He described the 3 wires to 2 Delaware shell entities, with no corresponding services. Colin had been awake most of the night preparing. His response came at speed, in a single uninterrupted 12 minutes. Silas Bradbury, he said, was a former engineer with documented mental health struggles after the death of his wife, who had voluntarily separated from the company and had no remaining claim. The royalty reduction had been a prudent fiscal decision approved by the board. The Strategic Reserve Fund was a routine corporate vehicle. The 2 consulting firms had provided real services that he could substantiate if given the time. Reagan Cox nodded along. Marlon Tate nodded along. Harlow listened without interrupting. When Colin finished, she set the green binder on the table. She opened it to the handwritten letter. She slid it across the table to him. He glanced at it and looked away. She opened the binder to the original agreement, which Park had received that morning by certified courier from Callaway, Reese, and Voss, with a notarized cover sheet. She placed it side by side with the amendment. The change in language was visible in the first paragraph. The original was countersigned by Harrison and witnessed by Margaret and by 2 senior partners at the law firm. The amendment carried only Colin's signature. Park spoke without raising his voice. Mr. Whitaker, the original agreement is in escrow at Callaway, Reese and Voss under a notarized cover sheet dated 9 years ago. Your amendment is dated 4 years ago and carries no counter-signature from the original parties. The amendment is void on its face. The door at the back of the room opened. Silas walked in. He wore a clean white cotton shirt and khaki trousers. No jacket, no briefcase. He carried one thing in his hand, a drafting notebook in hard-board covers, the corners softened to gray by use. He did not greet anyone. He did not look at Colin. He set the notebook on the table and opened it to page 47. The page held 3 pencil schematics of a micro-bearing housing, signed in his hand, S.B. November 3rd, 14 years ago. He set a printed photograph beside it. It was a photograph of panel 3 from the gala display board. The schematic on the panel, and the schematic in the notebook, matched line for line. Colin looked at the page once and looked away again. Silas spoke. He did not raise his voice. "I am not here to take your job. You took it yourself. I am here because that foundation funds a clinical trial at UPMC that began 7 years ago. 62 patients are enrolled. 4 years of missing royalties means 12 people who could have been enrolled in the most recent cohort were not. I would like the board to think about that before this conversation goes any further." Reagan Cox looked down at his hands. Marlon Tate looked out the window. Harrison stood up. His voice was rough, but the words were even. "Effective immediately. Colin, you are removed as Chief Operating Officer pending criminal investigation. David will coordinate with the United States Attorney's Office. Security will accompany you out. Reagan, Marlon, you will each receive a separate inquiry." Colin opened his mouth. He closed it. He stood. He walked to the door. 2 security officers fell in behind him. Silas closed the notebook. He looked at Harlow. Harlow looked at her father. For 3 seconds, no one moved. The board reconvened at 3. 2 independent directors had been brought in temporarily on Park's recommendation. Silas was seated at the table as founder of record under the original agreement. The board opened with 3 proposals from the governance committee, drafted that morning. First, restoration of 8% preferred equity to Silas Bradbury. Second, appointment as vice chairman of the board. Third, a public statement acknowledging the role of Bradbury Precision in the company's foundation, with an accompanying press tour. Silas declined each in turn. He did not raise his voice. He did not rehearse. "I sold this company 9 years ago because my daughter was 4 months old, and my wife was 3 months in the ground. I made that choice with both eyes open. I don't regret it. I am not here to undo it." He paused. "What I ask is this. 1. Restore the Lenora Foundation royalty stream retroactive to 4 years ago, with statutory interest and a separate disgorgement of the funds Mr. Whitaker diverted. 2. Amend the Foundation's bylaws so that future payment streams are administered by an independent trustee, not by Sterling's Chief Operating Officer. 3. Open the Foundation's annual disbursement reports to public filing. After that, my name comes off any further document. That is all." David Park asked one question. "Forward governance. Would you accept any advisory role at all?" The board would be reassured. Silas considered. "1 day a quarter. I'll sit with your young engineers, not the board, the engineers. I'll look at what they're building. That is the most I will give, and I want it written that it is at will on both sides." The board agreed without dissent. Harrison stood. He walked around the long table. He put out his hand. Silas took it. The handshake lasted longer than a handshake usually does. Neither man spoke. They had said the things that needed saying in the bindery the day before. There was nothing left to say now. The meeting adjourned at 4. Silas walked out into the corridor on the 40th floor and turned toward the elevator bank. Harlow caught up to him at the doors. She had not been at this meeting. She had spent the afternoon at her desk signing the temporary orders that consolidated the COO's authority under her own name. She had run the 2 flights up rather than wait for an elevator. She caught her breath. Silas stopped. "I would like to understand the company I run," she said, "not as a CEO learning history. As someone who has realized she has been running on a foundation she never read the blueprint of. Would you teach me? Engineering, you mean? Engineering. And the rest?" He looked at her. He thought for a few seconds. "My shop closes at 6. Come after. Bring questions, not paperwork." The elevator chimed. The doors opened. He stepped in. The doors closed. Harlow stood in the corridor for a moment, looking at her own faint reflection in the brushed metal. Then she walked back toward her office. 6 weeks went by. The foundation received $2.1 million in back royalties with statutory interest. Colin Whitaker was indicted by the U.S. Attorney on wire fraud, breach of fiduciary duty, and misappropriation of charitable assets. Reagan Cox and Marlon Tate resigned from the board within a week of each other. Sterling Industries issued a short press release with no accompanying campaign. Silas had requested the low tone. The board agreed. Harlow developed a habit of stopping at the bindery on Tuesday and Thursday evenings after 6. The cover reason was engineering history. The real reason was that the shop smelled of glue and old leather. The lamps were warm, and the man who ran it was never in a hurry. He taught her how to test thread tension across a spine, using the same vocabulary he had used 20 years earlier to describe tolerance across a bearing housing. 2 crafts, 1 temperament. She listened. She wrote things down in a hardcover notebook he had bound for her the 3rd week. She did not tell anyone he had made it. Hazel was there most evenings. She read on the daybed by the window. Sometimes she asked Harlow questions. One Thursday she asked, without looking up, "Did you really not know about my dad?" "I didn't. I should have. Daddy says people who say I should have are people who will next time." Harlow did not answer that. 2 minutes later, walking past, she put her hand lightly on Hazel's shoulder for a second. Hazel did not move away. In the 3rd week, Harlow asked Silas to walk through the sterling precision floor in Hazelwood. He had not set foot there since the acquisition. He agreed to go alone. He stood in the bay for 40 minutes. He watched the housing line. He watched 3 young technicians at their stations. When he came back out to where Harlow was waiting, he said only, "They're doing it well. Tell them I said that, if it matters." Harlow said she would. She would. On a Thursday in late October, she brought a small cardboard box to the shop. Inside were the 3 original patent certificates. Margaret had pulled them from the Federal Records Office. The registered name on each read, Silas Bradbury. She set the box on the bench. "These belong to you." They always did. He opened the box. He looked at the 3 yellowed sheets. He set the lid back on. "Hazel will want to see them when she's older." "Thank you." He put the box on the high shelf, next to the gray wooden box. 2 things on one shelf now. He walked her to the door that night. A light rain was falling. He offered her an umbrella. She refused. It was only to the car. She walked a few steps and turned back. He was still in the doorway, the yellow shop light behind him. She did not say anything. She kept walking. 4 months after the gala, the first snow of February came light over Pittsburgh. Sterling Industries opened the Bradbury Reading Room on the ground floor of the headquarters building. The room was open without charge to engineering students from Carnegie Mellon and Pitt. A wall-sized print of the micro-bearing schematic hung along the south wall, the signature legible at human height. Under a glass case in the center of the room lay the original asset purchase agreement and the handwritten letter from Silas to Harrison. A small brass plaque beside the case bore one sentence. He asked nothing for himself. He asked that her name continue to do good. On the same day, Sterling announced that the Lenora Bradbury Foundation would maintain its administrative office on the 12th floor of the building under an independent trustee, Dr. Annika Pohl of the U.P.M.C.A.L.S. Center. Silas came to the opening with Hazel. He wore a gray suit, his only one, kept in a garment bag for funerals, and now this. Hazel wore a navy velvet dress and carried a sketchbook. Harrison stood beside Harlow at the front of the room. He had aged visibly in 4 months, but he stood straight. He spoke for 2 minutes. He did not say Silas's name in the speech, at Silas's request. He said only this: "Some companies are built by the people whose names go on the door. Others are built by the people who chose not to put their name there. Both kinds matter." After the speeches, the room thinned out toward the coffee in the lobby. Silas and Hazel and Harlow stood together at the glass case. Hazel pointed at the bottom of the writer page, where Lenora had countersigned from her hospital bed 3 weeks before she died. "That's Mama's signature. That's Mama's signature." Harrison joined them. He stood beside Silas for a long moment without speaking. Then he said, "Beatrice would have liked this room." "I think she would have." The 2 older men stood side by side at the glass and looked down at the page. For the first time in 9 years, they were in the same place without anything between them. Hazel ran to the window to watch the snow come down over the Allegheny. Harrison followed her and sat on the bench against the wall and pointed out a crow on the ledge. An old man and a child. The frame held. At the glass case, Silas and Harlow were left. "Tuesday at 6, Harlow said quietly. "Hazel asked if I could bring soup. She has been planning that for 2 weeks. Bring the kind with barley." She nodded. There was a pause. "I'm not going anywhere, Silas. I want you to know that. Not as your boss. Not as anyone's daughter. As me." He looked at her. He did not answer with words. He set his hand over the back of her hand where it rested on the rim of the glass case. He left it there. Hazel laughed at the crow. Harrison smiled at Hazel laughing at the crow. 4 people in one quiet room on a Saturday morning in February, none of them in a hurry to go anywhere. Outside, the snow kept falling over Pittsburgh.